and welcome to Titanic Legacy, a creative collaboration between the Titanic Book Club and Cove Pod, the Carganilla online variety entertainment podcast. This podcast explores Titanic's lasting impact through conversations with creators, authors, artists, historians, filmmakers, experts, entrepreneurs, and more who continue to produce creative work inspired by the Ship of Dreams. If you are tuning in at home doing chores, driving to work, at the gym, working out on your run or your walk, however you're listening, thank you for giving us your time and welcoming us into your lives for the next half hour or so as we talk about Titanic and her long-lasting creative inspiration and impact. This is Titanic Legacy, the podcast. I'm your host, Paul Carganilla, and today I have the honor and pleasure of speaking with the author of the Titanic Book Club's Book of the Month for July 2024, Tea on Titanic, 100 years later. But before we bring her in, let me tell you a bit about our author of the month, Penelope Carlevato. Penelope is an author, speaker, and culinary expert noted for her expertise and her expertise. Founder of Penelope's Tea Time, a blender and marketer of specialized teas, and co-hostess of the cable TV program Cooking Up Wonders, Penelope has written a previous book on tea, The Perfect Cup, as well as many articles on the world's favorite table beverage. Born in England to a war bride and reared in South Dakota, Penelope learned the arts of hospitality and the special role of teas and tea time etiquette from her mom. She has expanded her proficiencies as an ambassador of tea, as a hostess of Tea Time Ministries, instructor of the art of the afternoon tea, and guide of an annual Taste of Britain tea tour. Her background and the universal fascination with the Titanic stirred her interest to research the social ambiance and unique menus of afternoon teas and high teas on the high seas 100 years ago. Tea on the Titanic is not just interesting history and surprising details about bygone times, but it's also a collection of great recipes. And I think it is tea time and high time to get to it. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming to the Titanic Legacy podcast, Penelope Carlevato. Good morning and welcome.
Thank you, Paul. This is great.
Thank you so much for joining us. So I read a bit about your bio and your history, and I was just curious as to, like, it mentions that you learned the arts of hospitality and tea time etiquette from your mom. Was tea a huge part of your childhood as you were growing up, or what are your earliest memories of it?
Well, my mom was British and was a war bride, came over after World War II. And I was just a little one then, but you never went to my mother's house when she didn't ask you if you would like a cup of tea. So yes, tea was an integral part of my growing up, and it became something that I shared with my kids and my grandkids. And now, as my grandkids are adults, their kids now are learning to have afternoon tea. So it's just been, I guess I'm known as the tea lady or whatever you want to call it, tea grandma. But yes, tea is an important part of my life. And my mom is the one that started it all. Bless her soul.
Oh, and was writing books or being an author something that was always a big dream or aspiration for you? Or when did that start?
Not really. I had a very long career as a registered nurse. And probably the only things I did then, I did a lot of journaling. I always journaled. And so those things, but what really started it all, I guess I started writing some things for work, just technical things, nursing things. And so I realized that I liked writing and did not really have the goal of writing a book, except I kept thinking, there's so many books on tea. I really don't see where another book on tea would fit in, until I went to visit the Titanic Museum in Pigeon Forge. Had a couple grandkids with me and my husband. And as we were walking through the exhibit, the amazing Titanic exhibit in Pigeon Forge, I realized that I was looking at numerous beautiful bone china cups and saucers and silver teapots and I'm thinking, well, of course, that was the era when tea was at its height of popularity. It was the social thing to do. So I said to my husband, hey, how about if I write a book, Tea on the Titanic? And so as we finished our tour, as you leave through the gift shop, which most any kind of a fun place you go anymore, you go out through the gift shop.
That's right.
Went out to the gift shop, and the Titanic Museum had a fairly big area of books. So I looked and thinking there must be a book, Tea on the Titanic, and there wasn't. So it was 2011. So 2012 would be the 100th anniversary. And I thought, well, that's a good goal. So that next year, that's what I did. I wrote Tea on the Titanic and had a lot of input from friends and wasn't really into the Titanic as much. But I did have a very unique little thing in the back of my mind that I remembered when I was a little girl. Our family traveled back to England to see grandparents, and my mother and I were having tea on the SS United States. It was only the third crossing across the ocean. It had its maiden voyage, gone to Southampton, back to New York, and now we were on this next voyage. It had just broke the ribbon for being the fastest ship. So my mother and I were on this ship and with my dad and my brother, and we were having afternoon tea. And my mother made the comment, this must have been like it was on the Titanic. And I never heard of it before. And I said, what's the Titanic? So she gave me a kind of a very condensed version of what the Titanic was. And that at the same time kind of came to my mind. And I thought, oh, that all started it. So I began a little dive into finding out more about the Titanic. And that, well, actually, that was even before because another friend of mine, a hat maker from Hollywood, she made hats for what she make hats for some of the big shows that the women wore these big hats, not for Titanic, but for Victorian movies and things. And so we had been asked to do a Titanic tea, which we did. And so we both kind of delved in to read what was on. And then the movie came out. And then the Titanic was discovered. So it's just all kind of came together.
Yeah, like a perfect storm.
Yeah.
But it mentions in your bio that you had written a previous book called The Perfect Cup. Was that before this one?
Yeah, and it was just a small little, it was more like a little pamphlet. But since Tea on the Titanic, I have now written 3 more books. And the one I wrote after Tea on the Titanic was First Class Etiquette. And it says from the Titanic to now, manners matter. So this was a book when I was working on Tea on the Titanic, and there's a lot about etiquette and manners in that book, and I was not seeing a lot of etiquette and manners, and just thought, this might be kind of a fun book. So my then 12-year-old granddaughter did the illustrations for it. And it's got, it's for a child, just a little synopsis of what the Titanic is about. And then there's recipes, so you can have your own Titanic tea. And what it's been really encouraging is that I hear from a lot of teachers who use this book in their unit that they teach on the Titanic in class, and then they do a Titanic tea. And so all the children dress up and they practice etiquette and manners. So that was the second book. And my granddaughter that illustrated it for me just became a new mommy yesterday. So that was quite a while ago that we did that, but I'm real proud of that. And then the next book I did was The Art of Afternoon Tea from the era of Downton Abbey and the Titanic. And this book came out 2016, and I had been watching Downton Abbey, and I think a lot of Titanic fans are also fans of Downton Abbey. The very first episode on Downton Abbey, they are talking about their relative who may have perished on the Titanic. And they're ironing the newspaper, and they're reading about it. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, of course, the Titanic and Downton Abbey, same era. So that's what I did. I combined a lot of the stories from Downton Abbey with some of the people in the Titanic, and kind of did recipes. And then I talk a lot about just some of my own experiences and, growing up as a English girl in America, that I still had that Anglophile that I wanted to be there. And so my mother had a lot to do with that book. And then the last one I wrote was actually one I did long even before the Perfect Teacup, was the Tea Lover's Journal. And it has just quotes at the top of each page, and some from some very famous people we know, like Helen Benninger. That's Margaret Brown's great great granddaughter, and so that kind of ties everything together. So that's where we're at. But Tea on the Titanic was really the first book that was published that I would really take credit for.
I got to meet Helen Benziger yesterday and have a
Oh, okay.
conversation with her. She is such a pleasant and wonderful lady to talk to. So
She
glad we got to get
is.
to know her a bit. So when in Tea on the Titanic, 100 years later, I love that like it starts with your personal story about that you just told, and then the format I think is so great. You do some historical stuff at the beginning, and then you delve into some recipes. How did you come across these recipes?
Well, growing up having tea, there's always certain things that you have. An afternoon tea, not to be confused with high tea. High tea is just basically supper with a big pot of tea. But afternoon tea is what we think of when we think of all the glorious, sandwiches and scones and desserts. And so I just kind of went through a lot of recipes that I had. I also researched some recipes from that period, but I also called upon my cousins in England, because they all do afternoon tea. You don't do afternoon tea in England like everybody thinks. Like every afternoon, everybody stops and you have this glorious, you might have a cup of tea and a biscuit or a cookie.
Hmm.
So some of the recipes are from them, and some are from my mother. But a lot of things that I realized, that some of those recipes from the Victorian era, we don't have time to do anymore.
Hmm.
We, we're fast paced. So some of the recipes I've streamlined, and also have converted from English metric system to ours. So instead of, so many ounces or grams, you can do it in cups. So that's where some of them are really things that I grew up with. Some are things that I kind of tried for the first time and did them. One of them, one of my cousins, Angela, was one of the co-guides on my tours to England. She would help me with them, and she always had this one cake in her house called Angela's tea cake, and it's on page 127. And to us, it's kind of like a fruit cake, but it's not as heavy. And so that's her recipe for that particular cake. And then I think Earl Grey tea is probably one of my favorite teas, and so right across the thing, I've got an Earl Grey tea cake. It's nice to have always something on hand in case somebody does pop by and you want to invite them for a cup of tea. You don't want to just sit there with a cup of tea. So I like to have, shortbread cookies I usually have on hand. Those are a favorite for years and years. That recipe's been handed down for a long time. And then I also have uh, my cousin's daughter, yeah, has a bakery. And so she has given me recipes over the years. And she now is email or shipping cakes and cookies and things all over the world. So she's she's been a real delight in helping me with doing recipes too.
That's great. And you mentioned in your book, I was reading it poolside one day with my wife, and I said, like, you say something at the top that's like, tea was like something we don't think about anymore today. I think Americans, if Americans ever thought about it, but tea was an event. It was a time to kind of stop the day and get together and socialize, talk to each other, and I was trying to think of something that resembles anything like that for us. And other than, no, it's happy hour, let's go to the bar and have a drink. But we don't, I wish we had moments, especially in today's society, where we just put down the phones, put down the iPads, and poured a cup of tea and talked to each other. That is just so interesting to me. And you say in your book, how, I mean, even in this conversation, how it's in England, overseas, like it's still a huge part of culture there.
Well, and when you talk to someone that goes to visit England, that's usually one of the first things they want to do. They want to experience a real English afternoon tea. And in fact, just this morning at church, I was talking to a gentleman. He was telling me that his daughter and family were in England. And he said, oh, they've just had such glorious tea times over there. They stop at these little tea shops in these little villages, or they have maybe afternoon tea at one of the big hotels in London. And it's always a time to just really sit down and value the friendships and value your friends. They say you can't rush a good cup of tea, just like you can't rush through afternoon tea. There have been a lot of tea rooms that have opened and closed, sadly, because people want to come and experience that time of just being hospitable and being able to share and just relaxing for a little bit. But tea rooms are restaurants. And so very seldom can you go and stay at a tea room here in America, especially, and just sit and relax and stay for 2 or 3 hours, because a restaurant, it's a turnover. And so you don't get to sit around very long and do that. So my favorite place to have tea is at home, because there is no restrictions on time then. You can have a 1 hour, 2 hour, 3 hour tea, which I've had many times. And I guess my hope for all of this, one of the big goals of my writing about the Titanic, is that I really would love to keep this tradition alive. Instead of just us, rushing off to meet somebody for a quick cup of coffee at Starbucks, but being able to, number one, open our front doors, invite people into our homes. That's a kind of a lost art too. People are thinking in order to have somebody in their homes, they've got to have everything spotless and clean. And that's a myth, because people love to see where you live. They love to come in your home. It helps them to get to know you a little bit better. It breaks down barriers, I think, for hospitality. And just right now we're seeing so much division in our country and so much hostility, that me personally, as an older, mature generation person, I miss those times of when we just would sit around with, invite a friend over or two friends over, and our children would be playing with their toys at our feet. You don't see that much anymore. You have to have an appointment for a play date. So I'm kind of old fashioned. I guess I really like that tradition and that legacy that hopefully I can leave with my kids, and hopefully through these books that I've written will maybe encourage someone to take the time, slow down, and really hear the hearts of those that you love and the friends and neighbors. I just heard a story. I read an article actually a couple of days ago, and it kind of shocked me, and I shared it with a friend. But it was a 27-year-old woman, and her family had just moved into this older established neighborhood. And she got a cake from a gentleman, a single widower that still lived in the neighborhood. He'd lived there for 30 or 40 years, and he was in his 90s, and he brought this family a cake. She was just blown away. She could not believe that people still did that.
Mm.
So she turned around and made him a lemon meringue pie and went over, and he said, "Hey, it's just part of the way I live. I just want you to enjoy our neighborhood as much as I have over the years." And it just hit me like, wow, we have gone a long ways from welcoming somebody to our neighborhood, that this was a huge thing to this woman, that she had no idea that people still did that. So I'm hoping that I can encourage people to open their front doors and put on the kettle and have a cup of tea, and don't worry about your house being all spick and span, and just enjoy your neighbors.
I love that. We moved into my current home now, I think in 2019, and a neighbor from across the street brought us a basket full of just fresh fruit from their backyard. And that was like, I still get goosebumps thinking about it because it was so sweet and something like it had never happened to me before when I moved into a new place, like neighbors coming over and bringing something from their home to share with us. And I love that. I love what you said about I wish more people would do that. Like that's I feel like a cultural thing that's fading out, and we need to try and preserve that. I feel like um, Kevin in the chat, he's talking about how important tea was to Scotland as well. I think everybody in that part of the world over across the pond. I
Yeah.
remember I haven't made it to England yet, but I remember I actually had the opportunity to go to Paris 12 years ago now, when my fiance, now wife, was working there. And just, I remember being blown away. I was 30 years old at the time, but at the difference in culture and how slow, they just have this way of slowing everything down. I don't remember it necessarily being tea in Paris, but it was more like the coffee and the croissants. Like you just sit on the corner and enjoy. Like no one's in a rush. Everyone's just having a hot beverage with a delicious baked goods. And just the culture shock from, I grew up here in Southern California, and then going to Paris and seeing that was just like, whoa.
Yeah, we don't see too many sidewalk cafes either, and that's so prevalent in Europe and the British Isles, and like you said, Paris, people sitting outside, taking the time, having a coffee or a tea. It's just, yeah, we've just, I remember reading in Bill Bryson's book. I can't remember which one it was. A small island. I don't know if you've read any of his books, but he said, when he's American and he moved to England and lived there for quite a while, and then he came back to America, and he wrote this book, A Small Island, just comparing the two countries. And he said he went to a place in America where it was like the Grand Canyon or something. And he said, so people would drive up, they'd all hop out of their cars, they'd go to the edge of the canyon, they'd peer down, they'd hop back in their car and leave. He said, we don't do it like that. He said, we'll go to some like Cheddar Hills or someplace in England. He said, we go and we take a basket, a thermos of tea, and we go and sit and we enjoy what we're going to do. He said, you Americans just rush over, peek over the edge, and then you're gone. And I thought that really does describe how we are here. We just rush from one thing to another. We're busy, busy, busy. So, like you said, you can't hurry a cup of tea. So that's my desire, that this would encourage the readers to slow down. If they've never had tea before, at least try it, and try it the British way with some milk. And that's what I do give in all the books. I always write about how to make a good, proper cup of tea, not just dunking a tea bag in.
Yeah, an interesting observation about, how quick we are to just take a glance and then go. Like, we don't necessarily have the corner cafe, but we've got Starbucks everywhere. But it better be drive-through now, because
Right.
I can't even stop at
I know.
Starbucks.
I know. Oh gosh, that's sad.
Yeah. So, do you have any other? You mentioned a couple of of favorites here in the book. Are there any others that you want to chat about?
Oh, you mean as far as the recipes?
Yeah.
Well, I think the if I got to well, I love to make tea sandwiches, and one of the things that I've noticed when I go to tea some places, that they're kind of skimpy on the sandwiches, and I love the sandwiches. I love that savory part, and they're always served first in a tea. When you go to afternoon tea, you'll have tea sandwiches first, and then you'll have the scones with the jam and cream, and then you'll have the sweets. And I like really piling on the sandwiches. I love the different sandwiches, and I think that probably the most popular one is the cucumber sandwich, and that is on page 116. And then probably my next favorite one is the Cotswold cheddar. We That one is I went to a pub in England, oh gosh, many years ago, and I went in and asked for a cheese sandwich. Well, the English have this wonderful thing called Branston pickle. And I don't know if I have it in. No, I didn't even put it in. Anyway, I've now added Branston pickle to this, or maybe the next one. Yeah, on page 117 is a village cheese and pickle sandwich.
Mm.
And it's really sharp cheddar cheese with a little bit of mayonnaise, and then this chopped, well, Branston pickle now you can go get in World Market and Whole Foods and things like that. But it's kind of like pickles with Worcestershire sauce. It's a real savory taste, but you add it with the cheese, and it is delicious. And so I've kind of combined what I do now. I kind of combine that Cotswold cheddar with the village cheese and pickle, and put a little bit of bacon or maybe some onion in that sandwich, and that is a real favorite. People haven't had anything like that, and I was surprised when I ordered a cheese sandwich at the pub that that's what I got. And so I kind of took it apart and looked to see what it was, because it was really good. So that's one of my favorite. And then I think the curry, let's see if the curry chicken sandwich on 115 is probably, when I have a tea, I always make that one. I'm kind of I guess I'm kind of boring when it comes to what I serve at my teas, because I always serve cucumber sandwiches, and always serve curried chicken. And then I kind of have one or two that I really like the Cotswold cheese sandwich. And then a lot of times I'll do a salmon with cream cheese. Those four are kind of my top ones that I serve, and people seem to like them. Um, I I love to have afternoon teas. I would love to have this whole book club over for afternoon tea, that we could just sit and we could hear everybody's stories about how they got involved, in the Titanic. And um, I did want to bring that up because I love what John Joslin said in John and Mary Joslin in their Titanic museum. On the wall, it says, the best way to respect and remember those who gave their lives is to just simply share their story. And that kind of pierced my heart when I went through there, and then saw those teacups and teapots, and then realized that these souls that were on the Titanic, those that survived and those that were lost, that they were people just like you and me. We tend to Hollywood everything, but they were people, and they were people that probably sat and drank tea, and they were, all different classes. So kind of got off from the recipe thing, but that's part of my love for why I really resonate with the Titanic. And I love meeting people who have some story of how they came to it. Either they had a relative, or I kept thinking maybe I did have a relative, because my mother's maiden name was Barrett, and Fred Barrett was one of the boilermen, and he did survive, but really haven't found out any more about him. And when I've gone and checked my grandfather's and my grandmother's, nothing ties me to Fred Barrett, which is too bad, but I have that one connection. So
Yeah, he's there's a lot of great stories about him and what he did for the survivors, not just the night of the sinking, but on the Carpathia as well. I love what you just said, and that's why I wanted to start this podcast. Was I am just so interested and blown away by how Titanic continues to inspire people today to write books, to write stories, to get together and talk. And it's amazing to me that her legacy is still being carried forward. And that is a huge goal that I have with putting these episodes together, is just continuing to tell her story, keeping the memory alive, and, you know, realizing it's not just a tragic action movie. This happened. There were 2,200 souls on board. And this is a night that we must remember, not just for the tragedy itself, but for the people that were on it. And it was a melting pot of the diversity, people from all classes, all over the world, and their story needs to continue to be told. And that's so why I do this. That's what keeps my heart's fire and my passion going to tell the stories of those that we lost, and those that survived, and those that continue to carry the torch today by sharing with everyone through what they're creating. And I thank you for being a guest on the show and for sharing your book with us, Tea on the Titanic, 100 years later. Ladies and gentlemen, Penelope Carlevato. Do you have any last thoughts to share before we say I bid you adieu?
Well, I'd just like to find out how you got involved in loving the Titanic too.
I will send you a link to my episode about that.
Okay, I haven't heard that, so it's So no, I've just been so encouraged and so blessed to have met so many people that have had such a huge effect on keeping that story alive. And I think, Mary Jocelyn has always been Mary Kellogg Jocelyn has always been an encourager to me in writing, and has been so supportive. And that's been a huge blessing to me. And plus the people that I've met. I mean, the crew on the Titanic and Pigeon Forge they're an encyclopedia of anybody that you want to know about. I'm just always blown away. They'll mention somebody, they know the whole story. But how generous they are and how fun it is to be around them. And I'm really looking forward to the Titanic Com 24 conference, which is next month, up there in Pigeon Forge. And I'll be doing a workshop there on etiquette and manners and how they collide from 2024 and 1912. So there's a huge similarities that we can take in and know that we are keeping the legacy of not only that story, but also of the elegance of that time that we can share with our family. And we can keep things from being a drive-through Starbucks to a sit-down afternoon tea. So thank you so much for having me. It's been a delight. And I hope I get to meet some of the people that get to talk on here. Is there a way that we can, or you can let them know how they can communicate with me, right? You'll do
Absolutely. Well, let's do that right now. Keep in touch with Penelope. She's inviting all emails at penelopesteatime@gmail.com. And of course, to find any of her books and all about everything she's doing, everything she's working on, her official website is penelopecarlevato.com, and we will put those in the show notes as well. Keep in touch with Penelope. If you're headed to Titanic Con next month, be sure to say hello. We just had Bill Willard on a couple of weeks ago, and so I know a lot of people are excited about that event, and I can't thank you enough for being on and sharing your story. Thank you so much, Penelope.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
And before we wish everybody happy Titanic trails, I'd like to ask all our friends who enjoyed this conversation to subscribe to the Titanic Book Club newsletter and YouTube channel. Links will be in the show notes. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to subscribe, rate, leave a review on your favorite podcast platform. And if you love conversations with inspirational creators, you can find many more non-Titanic related on my personal podcast, Cove Pod. Click over, give that a listen. Thank you so much. I want to say thank you one more time to our guest, Penelope Carlevato, and thank you all for tuning in. Until next episode, seize the day, follow your heart's fire, and make each day count.